Good evening and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Marcy Carriker Smothers. My name is Jamie Madsen. I'm the marketing and events coordinator here and will also be your host for the evening. So just a couple things to note before we get started. Go ahead and keep an eye on your chat box tonight. I will be using this to share links to purchase tonight's title, a discount code, where to find more information, as well as previous titles by Marcy. And additionally, the format will feature between 35 to 45 minutes of speaking and will then be followed by a live Q&A. If you have any questions or comments for Marcy tonight, go ahead and submit them under the Q&A icon, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. And now I'm excited to introduce tonight's author, Marcy Carriker Smothers. Marcy is the author of the fan favorite, Eat Like Walt, The Wonderful World of Disney Food. A noted radio personality, she hosted several programs, including The Food Guy and Marcy Show with the Food Network's Guy Fieri. And she is with us tonight to discuss her latest title, Walt's Disneyland, A Walk in the Park with Walt Disney. And thanks so much for being with us tonight. I'm so excited to hand it over to you, Marcy. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Copperfields, for having me. And I want to emphasize how important Copperfields is to me. My kids and I went to Copperfields for every single birthday since they were very little. The one in Montgomery Village would go to Shogun's, and we would go across the street to Copperfields and then get their books, and then we would bring them home. And they're really, the Young Readers program was gigantic. I mean, I asked my son today who some of his favorites were, and he said Garth Nix and T.A. Barron, which I've forgotten, those are such big authors. And when J.K. Rowling was here, this was at Maria Carrillo High School. Harry Potter wasn't quite a sensation. I mean, it was big, but it wasn't as big as it was going to get. And, we waited in line for 3 or 4 hours to see her and his little, lightning bolt on his forehead. And I mean, I'll just never forget his eyes when he met her. It might have been a rock star, the president of the United States. I mean, she to him was his hero. My daughter we went to go see Lauren Myracle, who was a gigantic YA author. And when we got there, it was a much less crowd than she had expected, but she was like such a pro, so amazing. She said, girls, get down on the floor, crisscross applesauce. We are gonna just have the best hour together. And my daughter still talks about that experience. And the last one I want to share, if any of you guys know Lemony Snicket, he was at Copperfield presented Lemony Snicket at Santa Rosa High School. And uncharacteristically of me, I was running late. And so when we got there, the line was wrapping around the high school. And we were like the last to get in, and we were in the top row. And my son was a little disappointed because he was used to us being there first, a front row waiting so eagerly. And when the end of the talk was done, Lemony said, "You poor unfortunate fools who got here early in the front row. I'm going to start signing books from the back." And so we were the first people to get our book signed. So thank you, Copperfields, and thank you to all of you, because it is so important that we celebrate and support our independent booksellers. And so here we go, Walt's Disneyland. I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. So the question I get a lot was, how did you decide to do this book? And the quick answer is, after I did Eat Like Walt, my mentor and a Disney legend, Jim Core, and I were having lunch, and he said, "What's next, kid?" And I said, I have this idea. I had 3, but when I said, I have this idea about doing a guidebook, if you will, guidebook, air quotes, to Disneyland told in Walt's words and the people that knew him, he's like, that's it. That's the one, make it a priority. So 3 years later, hundreds of sources is this book. And it's meant to be small and portable the way it is. It could have easily been a hardcover book, coffee table book. Had the same amount of words, could have been spread out like Walt. However, I wanted it to be affordable and portable, and it was really important to me to preserve Walt's legacy, to help people know where to find Walt in the park, and hopefully maybe even bring the book in with them. And when they're reading about something, then they could look at the book, see the photos, read the history, and they would be standing right there. So right here, one of the things that I love, and the reason I put it on a few places in the book, is how Walt explained to people why he wanted Disneyland. And excuse me, I kind of have a Walt voice that I do. And I kept insisting, I want this amusement park. And everybody says, what's he want that amusement park for? I couldn't think of a good reason, except that I don't know. I wanted it. That's why we have Disneyland. And I was not going to do a dedication. This is Roy O., Walt's brother and business partner. And but I loved how he said that he thought that Walt's influence will never be finished. And that's how I felt about writing this book, is Walt's influence will never be finished at Disneyland, and it is there for all of us to enjoy. So you might hear me say, this is my favorite story. I can't help myself because I get so excited, but this is one of my favorite stories. This is Walt's #1 badge. And we only know of 2 times that he was photographed in it. One was on opening day in front of Sleeping Beauty Castle. And this is brass, excuse me, and it was so heavy, it was kind of like tipping over on his coat pocket. The other time that Walt wore it was on the 10th anniversary special, and he turns to Disneyland hostess and ambassador Julie Ream and says, "Look at me, I'm #1 secret agent." And that's the only time we ever know that Walt was photographed. And then soon thereafter, it was believed to be lost. There's an archivist at the Walt Disney Archives named Ed Ovale, and when he first started there, he asked the head person, Dave Smith, the founder, "Where's Walt's #1 badge?" And Dave told him, "I have no idea. I archived Walt's entire office, after he passed away, every single last thing, and it wasn't in his office, it wasn't at home." So it was long believed to be lost, but Ed, whose specialty is Walt Disney, that's his primary area of research, one afternoon he said, I'm going to go looking through Roy's files. And he went digging through Roy's files, he found a box. He opens up the box and there's all the file photos lined up, but the files in the back were kind of pushed up. So he reaches his hand back behind the files and he finds a paper bag, crumpled old paper bag. And he shook it and he heard metal on metal. And when he looked inside, there were Donald Duck pins and Walt's badge. So it was not lost. It was not forgotten. His brother Roy had saved it all those years, and it is a precious resource at the Walt Disney Archives. It's currently on display in the Traveling Archives 50th Anniversary exhibit, and it has got a prominent place in my book. Here we have Walt when he the decision had been made where Disneyland was going to be. You can read more about that in the book. Of course, Anaheim, and here is Walt walking the orange groves, pacing it off personally, and you can just see the absolute joy in his face at the very beginning of Disneyland. I love this. Okay, so in the Walt Disney Archives, I was able to look through all of Walt's personal desk diaries that his secretaries kept for him. And you can imagine the entries were incredible about the time that 1954, particularly when Disneyland was being built in 1955, being built and opened. Disneyland was built in a year, by the way. Unbelievable, right? And when I saw this one, Walt to Disneyland Park, no appointments from July 12th to July 23rd. I was just besotted with it. Just an example of the enthusiasm and anticipation Walt had for Disneyland. So this is really interesting. Before COVID, in the before that time, and I was in the photo library at the Walt Disney Archives. It's a whole separate building in a secret location. And they have these notebooks. There are 3 ring binders, and they're all organized in Disney history. It could be animation, it can be art. In this case, of course, I'm looking in the section that's Disneyland. And I find this letter from Mike E., who snuck into Disneyland, and his mother said it was wrong and it was stealing. And so he sent 50 cents to Walt Disney. He says, "I think Disneyland was real nice. I won't sneak in again. I promised my mother. I hope you won't be mad at me." And I just knew that I had to have it. So I asked for a scan, but I had no idea really how it was going to fit into the book until over a year later, I read an account from Walt's friend Russell, who said that when they were in Kansas City, he talked Walt into sneaking into an amusement park, and they used to do that. But when they were adults, Walt made his friend promise, "Don't ever tell that story while I'm alive, because I don't want to give anyone an excuse to sneak into my Disneyland." And it's a good point here probably to mention that every single person in this book and Eat Like Walt knew Walt, no exceptions, no third person, no my dad told me, no my uncle said. Either I travel and I meet the person, or I read their interviews in the archives or the books that they published, so that I can maintain only first person accounts. Here we have Walt with Imagineer Vic Green. Abraham Lincoln was Walt's favorite president, by the way, mine too. And when he built Great Moments for Mr. Lincoln, that is the model there before the World's Fair. Walt was just incredibly excited about this. He was very involved with how Lincoln would move. He would explain to the Imagineers how he studied how Lincoln spoke as much as he could from reading accounts, and would actually act out the way he wanted Lincoln to perform. And when Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln came from the World's Fair to Disneyland, he wanted to make sure that young people had the opportunity to learn about this great president. And so he made it free. It was admission. He made it free for youngsters 17 years and younger to attend Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. There was a special ticket included when they came in. And to this day, one of the original, we're not entirely sure it's the original, but one of the original posters where Walt says why he wants young people to come to this attraction is still there in the Opera House if you look. Now, this is interesting for you, all of you out there. I can't see you, but raise your hand if you think you know more about Disneyland than anybody else. You know, I know we all, us geeks, I'm a proud geek. I know we're always, you know, we always want to tell our friends and share what we know. I'm just a lucky person that got to write a book about it. But here I'm correcting myself, because this photo hangs next to the entry, the actual doors that go into the theater at Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. And it is mislabeled. I had put it in the book and said, there is Walt on the right, dressing up as Abraham Lincoln. But that's not what this is. That was a separate vaudeville performance. And so I thought that was really interesting. Even Disneyland occasionally gets it wrong, you know, because it's passed down. But that's also because we're always learning and there's new information. And that new information came to the archives after that had been installed. And, you know, the thing about why it is often thought to be, you know, Walt as Abe Lincoln was, and when he was in elementary school, he memorized the Gettysburg Address. He did make a stove hat by himself. He put on his dad's suit and he recited by heart the Gettysburg Address. And the principal was so impressed with Walt that he sent him from room to room to deliver the Gettysburg Address. And he did it in subsequent years. Here's Walt's, always watching people, sometimes in disguise, sometimes not, sometimes in his business suits, was one of his passions. Okay, so this is an interesting room. You see there Walt with the tie of Smoke Tree Ranch, which was his Palm Springs vacation home. He wore those smoke tree ties a lot. When you look at that window on the right, that window is still there. What this room is sometimes called the Disney room, but Walt called it the Hideout. And in early memos, when Disneyland was being built, he said, you know, no matter what the budget is, the Hideout stays, because he wanted to have a private room where he could entertain guests. It had a bar and it had a restroom. And this room, if you at the Plaza Inn at Disneyland at the end of Main Street, USA, the beautiful Plaza Inn was where he had his hideout. In this photo, if you're looking at the Plaza Inn, it's on the right side. And those windows, those triptych windows, you can go to those exact windows, Walt's windows. If you walk across from the first aid, you can see, you can't see in, but you can see the windows. Later, that was moved to the other side of the Plaza Inn, much, much, much smaller, because when Walt took over the restaurant in 1965, they needed this space to be a kitchen. So there's so much serendipity with writing and researching a book, especially about Walt Disney and Disneyland. And for me, I'm fairly new at it. This will be, I think, my 7th year. There certainly are authors out there, wonderful, wonderful authors who've been doing this 40 and 50 years. So for me, there was a tremendous amount of discovery. Well, there's a story in the book. I had read an interview with Ray Bradbury, who was very close friends with Walt and actually wanted to collaborate with him. And I think Walt told him that wouldn't work, they'd kill each other. But after Walt had passed away, Ray would go to the park all the time. And he called John Hench one day because he had noticed, if you notice this spire on the top right of Notre Dame Cathedral, and if you look on your photograph, that is Notre Dame's Jean-Luc spire in the gold on the right side there. And Ray Bradbury had been I think this was the 80s, so Walt had been gone over 10 years, and he had been going to Disneyland since 1955, but it was the first time he noticed it. And he wrote to John Hench, who was one of Walt's Imagineers, and said, my God, how long has that gold Jean-Luc spire been on Sleeping Beauty Castle? John Hench said, 30 years. 30 years, my God, why? And it said, well, Walt put it there. And Ray just couldn't get over it. He goes, why? And he said, because he loved it. It was just there because he loved it. And that previous photo, when I saw the family walking in front of the Notre Dame, I just thought it was just a perfect tie-in to the story that I wanted to tell about Ray Bradbury and Walt. So Walt had two different looks. He had his working look, and he had his business look that we saw in front of City Hall. This is definitely his working look. He had this working hat. He had a few working hats, and here he is at the Adventureland Jungle Cruise, one of the first original 1955 attractions, and Walt is the very first skipper. Okay. Here we have Walt and Fort Wilderness. Fort Wilderness on Tom Sawyer Island. And he was very involved. Here you can see him, he is up there, he's inspecting, but he did spend a lot of time building Fort Wilderness. And in fact, I'm going to go back to that story. Excuse me, this is Walt testing one of the canoes, as you can see, pretty cool. Right when shortly after Disneyland opened, he would test all of the rides, which we'll learn. I'm going to go back now to Walt. Here he is on the Mark Twain. And he is looking at Tom Sawyer Island before it was developed. It took a little bit of time until it was developed. It didn't, when Disneyland opened, it had not become the attraction that we know and love today. And what is very unique about Tom Sawyer Island is that it is an attraction 100% wholly designed by Walt and with no other input. He had one of his Imagineers working on it. And he said, I don't know, let me take that home and I'll fix it for you. And he came back the next day and it was built exactly the way that Walt had drawn it. And we see Fort Wilderness, which was something that was upper right between 6 and 7, 8, 9. That's Fort Wilderness, very important to Walt. And after Walt passed away, his brother Roy said that, it's real simple. Walt thought that was real. And particularly Fort Wilderness, and they would take cardboard boxes and in Marceline, Missouri, when they were little guys, and they would build on this little island, dirt island, a fort. And he was very clear that Walt thought this was a real place. I think Walt thought Main Street, USA was a real place. And this is another attraction, the mine train, and Walt drew this one entirely himself. And that was something that it's gone now. It's basically where Big Thunder Mountain, it is where Big Thunder Mountain is now. There is some remnants of the mine train attraction that Walt designed in Nature's Wonderland, because if you go to Zocalo, the Mexican restaurant in Frontierland, and you're looking at Big Thunder Mountain, those ribs from the dinosaur are the same, almost exactly the same that was in the original attraction that Walt drew. But the fact that we were able to share a second attraction that was designed almost wholly by Walt was pretty cool. And there he is riding the attraction with his grandchildren. I think that is in the early, it's the dates in the book. It's in the early 60s, I believe. Here, Walt is testing the motorboats, which are no longer there. But if you can remember the motorboats, that's Admiral Joe Fowler, who was in charge of construction. Again, look at that smiley face of Walt's. And I'm going to apologize. I realize here I did not. Jamie, if you would send me, let's see. 1 second, guys. Oh, it's not going to work. No, I don't have a clock, so somebody's just going to have to start talking when hopefully I can, I'm on screen sharing, I can't see the time, so I'm going to keep going. I'm not sure how much time.
It's 7:20. You have plenty of time, Marcy.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. I purposely left everything in the other room. Anyway, so back to Admiral Joe Fowler, testing the motorboats. Now, here we have Walt with a model of It's a Small World. It's a Small World was another attraction that debuted at the World's Fair. But what's really fun about this is the clock in this image. When it came from the World's Fair to Disneyland, they installed it exactly where it is now. But that little platform, so where your boats go enter into the attraction and where they exit, was empty. And he was asking an Imagineer what he thought should go there on top of the platform. And he said, I don't know, it could be a band. And well, so it cannot be a band. We can't afford to have bands there every day. What about a clock? So he sent Imagineer Rolly Crump and Mary Blair to design a clock. And Mary Blair drew it, Rolly helped design it. At one point, it only had 12 little figures, and Walt said, do you know how many hours there are in a day, Rolly? And there's 24 hours, make 24 people, 24 animated figures. And those animated figures, the ideas for the animated figures came from when Walt visited Strasbourg's anatomical clock. And he was so fascinated by it. He was sketching it. And that was in 1935, I believe, so long before Disneyland was opened. And he even tried to climb the tower to see how it worked. Unfortunately for him, he was thwarted and not allowed to do that. But it shows how these inspirations for Disneyland came from way back and mostly from Walt's travels. And this is one of my favorite images and then one of my favorite quotes. Of course, there he is testing the Matterhorn. They used to crash it into hay, and this is when they had the water pool to slow it down. I say crash, bad choice of words, break it with hay. Now it breaks with water. But this quote from Ruth Patricia Shellhorn. Ruth Patricia Shellhorn was a landscape architect. She worked along with the Evans brothers, who were the ones who did a lot of the work and are usually the ones that you read about. You don't read as much about Ruth, but she had great input in the beginning of Disneyland. And she says the ideas of Walt Disney himself continually bubbled as he spent more time at the site. No one had to be ready at a moment's notice to adjust, change, add, or subtract some element. I doubt if this procedure could have been followed successfully on any other project on Earth, but this was Disneyland, a sort of fairyland, and Walt's belief that the impossible was the simple order of the day so instilled this spirit in everyone that they never stopped to think it couldn't be done. They just did it, and with amazing speed. And I hear that a lot from all the people that helped to build Disneyland. They would say that everybody pitched in, nobody, whatever your job description was, if your project needed help, everyone would stop and go and make sure that project was done. And again, as I said earlier at the beginning of our talk, Disneyland was built in 1 year. It's unfathomable today. Okay, so I get asked a lot, what did you learn that really surprised you? And that's a great question, and there's always more than one, but if I have to pick one, I'm going to pick this one. Here we see Walt standing in front of the Fantasyland attraction and Tomorrowland attraction, the Skyway. And here we are in Fantasyland. So when I was in the Walt Disney Archives, and let me tell you, it is as fun and exciting as you can imagine, fellow Disney geeks. It is like Christmas. Essentially what you do is you write an email, a list of all the things that you'd like to see. And then you sit in the reading room and they bring you boxes, but you don't know what's in the box until you open the box. And sometimes it's exactly what you want. Sometimes it's not. You go down all sorts of rabbit holes. But when I was reading Walt's correspondence from Disneyland, I found this. And what I want to point out is that Walt was told that people were waiting a very long time for, then they called it the Sky Ride. And Walt did not like people to have to wait in line. He liked it to move along. And so Walt says in 1958, perhaps during peak hours, we should discontinue the sale of round trips and establish a special line for single riders with the request that they double up. I still get goosebumps. I'm like, wait a minute, Walt Disney had figured out this concept of single riders in 1958, and it didn't even come to fruition for decades later. I don't know if it's a complete coincidence or that people saw this memo. I do not know. I know that a lot of people in the archives were surprised by this. Single rider occupancy, the idea of sharing a ride with somebody that didn't know, even though there are no strangers at Disneyland, but that was Walt's idea. He says a prominent side should indicate such changes. which of course now we know that their single rider lines are clearly designated. Pirates of the Caribbean, there is Walt with one of the pirates. Now this is a pretty cool shot, right? This is Walt. Again, this is a mock-up. This is actually up near here in Mountain View at Arrow. Walt going down the chute of the Pirates of the Caribbean. Now here's another super fun fact. Some of you may know this, that when they were building Pirates of the Caribbean, Walt said initially it was going to be a wax museum. You're going to walk through it. Pretty soon they decided that the conveyance was going to be boats. But it became apparent to Walt that he couldn't tell the story that he wanted to tell in the small amount of space that was available inside the berm or inside the railroad tracks. So he said, we're going to go under the railroad tracks and we're going to put a big show building on the other side of the railroad tracks and berm so we can do what we need to do to tell the story right. So that drop is not because it was intended to be a thrill, though it is to get you underneath the railroad tracks. Now here's something, and some people know that, but I think this is a pretty new fun fact to share with y'all that's in the book, is that when Walt had asked his Imagineer, Herb Ryman, to make some drawings about how his guests were going to get underneath the railroad tracks, I think it was a 26-foot drop, to show them some drawings. Herbie shows them some drawings and goes, yeah, they're all excited, they're getting wet, they're screaming. And just like with Tom Sawyer Island, Walt says, hey, can I take that home? Now, of course, he's Walt Disney. The next day he comes back and he says to Herbie, hey, Herbie, I like your idea, but I changed it. Okay, here's what's going to happen. So we're going to go down one drop, right? But then there's going to be another one and they'll never know what's coming. Now that'll get them, won't it? So it was Walt's idea also to have that second drop. That was meant to be a thrill and a total surprise. Here is Walt on the People Mover. And this is, I believe, the mock-up that was done at the studio in Burbank. And I love, that's another story when Ray Bradbury was just visiting Walt and Walt said, hey, let's go on the People Mover. And he said something, I'm paraphrasing. Ray said something to Walt, well, that's kind of neat. And Walt's like, neat, it's incredible. So I really do love seeing Walt writing everything when it's under development. There, of course, is Walt with Father, Carousel of Progress, another attraction for the World's Fair and another attraction that Walt was deeply involved with. His monorail, I have a mock-up of it, mine, or a toy of mine behind me. His monorail, another interesting story. When Walt went to Europe a lot, and one of these trips he would drive with Lily. It was a road trip. He felt like he could see the countries a little bit differently, but also he wouldn't be recognized as often. And one day he was in Germany and he's driving down this country road and the monorail zips by, and he stops the car and he runs to go find where this monorail is coming from, finds the building, no one speaks English. But the story is, if it wasn't for the serendipity of Walt being on a road trip and happening to see the monorail zip by, we might not have a monorail at Disneyland. Of course, trains were really very important to Walt. He had a home train in his Carrollwood residence in the Holmby Hills. And at some point, though, he decided that it was just too much work. People would come over on the weekends and he was slaving, getting the steam going and moving the coal, and he packed it up and he specifically sent it to Disneyland because he wanted it to be displayed there. And there is a piece of that train displayed in the Main Street train station. And most of it is at the Walt Disney Family Museum in the Presidio, if you haven't gone. When Walt was a little boy, his Uncle Mike was an engineer, so he used to get to ride in the cab sometimes. But this quote from Ward Kimball, who was one of Walt's 9 old men, trusted animators, helped a lot at Disneyland. He recalls when he said to Walt, you want to run up front? And Walt was like, no. And he said, go ahead. All you do is push a Johnson bar forward and open the throttle. It'll start off. And so he did. And I watched him. His eyes were dropping out of his sockets and he had his mouth open. He was running, I cry. He was running a locomotive for the first time. So now this is probably, I won't qualify it, I'll just tell you the story. So when I was writing Eat Like Walt, I had read that Walt's last day at Disneyland was on October 14th, 1966. And so I asked Ed Ovale, can I put that in Eat Like Walt? I mean, find the menus, talk about it. And it just wasn't the right time to enter it into history. It is a process to be able to do that as a writer for Disney Editions. It's also a tremendous privilege. So for this book, I really wanted to do it. So I had asked them about these things that you're seeing, the Disneyland ticket, and the program of the day. Those things came from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. The occasion on October 14th, 1966, was that Walt was entertaining the Medal of Honor recipients. I'm pretty sure at that point, the Medal of Honor recipients had never gone west of the Mississippi for an event, but Walt flew them all in, gave them hotels, had a day at Disneyland, had a special program, had a special lunch, and had this ticket. And you'll see it says shooting galleries accepted. And when Walt saw that, he got all flustered. He goes, "What? We've got the Medal of Honor recipients here. We won't let them go out and shoot." And at that time, I think there were 2 shooting galleries. So he made sure that that was rectified. And he announced at the Opera House when he was giving his presentation that it was okay, that you could go out and shoot. And that photo on your screen, it is grainy, but it's just incredibly important. It's believed to be among the last, if not the last photo ever taken of Walt at Disneyland. Also comes courtesy of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And we decided purposely not to improve it or try to, although I don't think that we could, because this was a copy of a copy. I wanted to leave it in the grainy self because this is history. This was Walt. Now, it's possible that other people that attended, of course, at that day have photographs or have film still left in their camera. We don't know, but we believe this is one of the last photos. And shortly after this, on October 14th, 1966, Walt went into the hospital for a routine chest x-ray and surgery, which was what thought to be a result of the polo accident. And it turned out he had lung cancer, and then he died 2 months later on December 15th, 1966. So what I think is really, I after this point, I'm pretty sad in the book. I mean, I cry, as you can tell. I'm already crying talking to you guys. My barometer for do I include it in the book or not, because I'm the reader as much as the writer. And like I said, I'm a total Disney geek. If I laugh out loud or cry or smile or get goosebumps, pretty much assured it's going to be in the book. It was the same sort of process I had when I was on KSRO here in Sonoma County and later KGO, and then my show with Guy Fieri. I figured, well, is this something that if I don't know it, other people aren't going to know it? Or if I find this funny, I bet other people will. So this I thought should be at the end of the book, because you might be a little bit sad when you read some other, the last day at Disneyland and some of the other stories about what happened that day with the lowering of the flag and the decision not to close, by the way, because Walt would never want it to close. He always valued and knew that some people would only make one trip to Disneyland, and that they would have spent a lot of time and money to get there. And his wife, Lillian, said, no, don't close. It's not what Walt would want. So anyway, if you're crying at the end of the book, I was hoping you would laugh before you left it. Why Disneyland will never work. So Walt commissioned Buzz Price, who is the same person that helped him find the land for Disneyland and Walt Disney World, to survey leading amusement park operators. And again, Walt was a theme park, first theme park in the world, but amusement park operators about the plans for Disneyland. And I believe, the story goes, they had drinks, they had cigars, and these were their responses when they heard the pitch. Walt's screwy ideas about cleanliness and great landscape maintenance are economic suicide. I love this one. Custom rides will never work. They cost too much to build. The town square is loaded with things that don't produce revenue, like that town hall and the fire department and the square itself. So all of this just was my hope that we end on a really happy note and realize how brilliant Walt was, what an innovator he was, and Disneyland is the gift that keeps on giving. Walt's daughter, Diane Disney Miller, who founded the Walt Disney Family Museum in the Presidio, I thought this was the most important quote I also wanted to share. One, because it's from Walt's daughter, but also because I find as generations go on, it's true. it's hard to believe that I talk to strangers at Disneyland, but I do. But, often I'll say to kids, do you think Walt Disney is a real person or somebody more like Santa Claus? And I get half and half, and so Diane Disney Miller was saying, I want them to remember him as he was, remember the man he was. A lot of people don't know that there was a Walt Disney. They think it's a company logo and that's it. He was a good man. And I want people to know that. So my last story is that reference I said about, Diane's concerned that people were thinking that it's a company logo or it's a brand representative and there isn't or wasn't a real Walt Disney. There's a story that I share from Joyce Hall. I got introduced to Joyce Hall through my friend Kevin Kern in the archives when I was writing Eat Like Walt, when he said, you don't see too many memos like this about food, and this time it's about food, when Walt had let go Vern Stouffer of Stouffer's fame that we know from the frozen foods. But at that time, he also had a lot of restaurants in America, and he had hired Vern to run restaurants. And pretty quickly after that, decided that he was going to do it himself. But because Joyce Hall had referred Vern, Joyce was writing to Walt saying, I'm sorry that it didn't work out, and why didn't it work out? So when I started researching Joyce Hall, I thought it was a woman. And I found out in my research, no, that's Joyce Hall of Hallmark Hall of Fame, a good friend of Walt Disney's. And interestingly, when Disneyland opened in 1955, Hallmark was not the greeting card company, it was Gibson. However, and they were friends from back when Three Little Pigs came out, because that was the first greeting card that Walt allowed to happen, and that was with Joyce Hall. But Joyce wrote a book, it's called When You Care Enough, and he talks about a flight he had from London to Los Angeles, and there were 3 little girls on the plane, and he turned to the oldest girl and he said, how did you like your trip to London? And she said, oh, it was okay. He said, just okay? And she said, I would have rather gone to Burbank. He said, why Burbank? And she said, well, to me, Walt Disney, of course, at the studio, and then go to Disneyland. And so he looked at her and he said, do you think that Walt Disney is a real person or someone more like Santa Claus? And she said, both. And he concluded, I agree, and I agree too. That is who Walt Disney was. There's my info, and I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we can go to, my mouse has now died, so don't kill me, guys. There we go. And stop sharing. Okay, hi, Jamie.
That was awesome, Marcy. Thank you so much. What a great presentation, too. It made it so much richer, and lots of people enjoyed it as well. I'm getting lots of great feedback. So let's open the questions. We have a couple here, and for everyone watching, we do have some time if you want to still submit yours. Okay, our first question is, other than great moments with Abe Lincoln, what was Walt's favorite attraction?
Well, here's the thing, is that as a historian, you never suppose or posit or say, this is, I can give you my best guesses. I also can say what Diane Disney Miller, his daughter, has said in the past was Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room was his favorite. Now she might have said that. Here's where it gets tricky in the historian world. She might have said that to one interviewer, and she might have said another attraction too. So you can't. But I know it was one of his favorites. Multiple people who work with Walt say that. That's because it was his first audio animatronic attraction. So it was a very big deal to him. Also, it had been intended to be a restaurant. I have those images in Eat Like Walt. The quadrant in the middle where the bird fountain comes down was actually the busing station, and those 4 little areas are where the tables were. And the restaurant chairs, when Walt abandoned the idea of a restaurant, he had done a mock-up at the studio, and he realized that people were going to be so enchanted with the birds above that he would never be able to get the turnover he needed. So he turned it into an attraction. But those restaurant chairs were the seating for Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room until I think it's like 2005. It opened in 63, a long time. And that's the one thing I ask people to say. It is called Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. It's the only attraction at Disneyland with Walt's name on it. That's because Walt owned it. He paid for it with his own money, and he sold it back to Disneyland on the day it opened. And that was why at the time, before even the e-tickets, you had to spend another 75 cents. The other ones, of course, Pirates of the Caribbean was the last fully realized attraction that he had worked on, and he did not live to see it. but we know how much he loved trains. So for sure the train, and by default, also the monorail. And again, I don't think we can't suppose, but, and then I'm going to add, very important, the Mark Twain riverboat. We also know that was one of his favorites, because when he was serving post World War I as an ambulance driver in the Red Cross Corps, he and his friend were talking about all the time that they are going to go and, ride the Mississippi and take this great trip, and it never happened. And Walt was really disappointed that it never happened. And so he built the Mark Twain for Disneyland so he could have that experience.
Wow.
So Walt Disney's Enchanted Room, Pirates of the Caribbean, though he didn't write it, so be really careful about that. I mean, you saw mock-ups of it, Mark Twain, and of course, Walt Disney's The Disneyland Railroad and Monorail.
Wow. That's awesome. Allison is wondering, you mentioned that Walt was the first skipper on the Jungle Cruise. I assume that was just a one-time thing, ? Did he sometimes go and work on certain attractions or ride certain attractions, not just for quality testing, or put on Mickey Mouse costumes and walk around anonymously?
Okay, I've never heard about the Mickey Mouse. I think we would have known if he did that. And so, with the Jungle Cruise, I don't know that he ever took, the microphone and led that again. But what is a really famous story, and it's in the book, and I love it, is that he would ride it all the time. And when he was riding it one time, the timing was off, and they barely got any time for the hippos because the driver, the Jungle Cruise captain, went right by it. And he went to this gentleman named Dick Nunes, who was then the supervisor, and ended up his career as a major level executive, built Walt Disney World, et cetera, president of Disneyland. And so when he would shoot out Dick Nunes, and Dick said, well, why don't you ride it with me, Walt, and teach me what you want to do? And that's what he did. And so he rehearsed for weekends, waiting for Walt to show up, because he had trained all of his Jungle Cruise captain, and then he didn't show up until one day he gets off the ride weeks later and just gave a thumbs up to Dick. That was like, okay, you fixed it, kid. So he did ride for pleasure all the time, like I said, often in disguise. And another great story was when he was riding Peter Pan, and he was waiting in line and chatting up the people in front of him, the guests in front of him, in its disguise, And so when they got off the attraction, they found Walt, and they said, wow, you really knew a lot about that attraction. It was so informative talking with you. And he said, I'm Walt Disney, and that would happen a lot. He would go in disguise, but then he couldn't stand that people didn't know it was Walt Disney. So I hope that answers your question.
That is such a fun story. I mean, can you imagine as a kid? That would be like the greatest day ever. Loretta is wondering, what sparked your love for Disneyland? Did you visit often as a child?
Well, I only got to go one time a year. My grandparents took me. It was always the happiest day of the year for me. And it was a big treat, a really middle-class suburbia, so the 5 cousins, myself and my brother and my 3 cousins would get in the Volvo, and we would arrive before Disneyland opened, and we would stay the whole day, till midnight. And I never wanted the day to end, but it would refuel. In the beginning of the day, I was so excited. At the end of the day, I was exhausted, but I felt like when I left, I was so full of Disneyland. I had just enough to go another 364 days. I have to recharge again.
Just another question around his costume. Phyllis is wondering, what would his disguises look like?
His disguises were mostly hats and really crumpled clothing, and sometimes hunching. And it worked a lot. And, other times that's the other thing that was really important to Walt, was waiting in line. In fact, other times, like at the World's Fair, when somebody offered to have him take cuts, he's like, no. He wanted all of his Imagineers and designers and workers to wait in line. And that's, I think, where he heard a lot from his guests. And I can tell you that is, I wrote a lot at Disneyland with Eat Like Walt, and before COVID with Walt's Disneyland, my laptop in my backpack, and I would listen all the time. And, and that is what Walt did. And so, yeah, he could go undetected. As I understand, he could do a pretty decent job until he ripped it off and said, I am Walt Disney. Yeah.
Was that the last time you were there? Was in 2019?
Oh, no, I was there in 2019, the day it closed. I just happened to be there the week that it closed. And it was very, very somber. But no one thought it would be closed that, over that long. We thought it'd be a couple of months. But once downtown Disney started opening, I was just so wanting to connect. That's how I write, when I am infused with that energy that I believe that Walt started, that still exists there. It's even in downtown Disney. So I was like a lot of people, I'd fly down or drive down, and I would wait like an hour and a half to get the temperature check. We were spread out, obviously 6 feet. The line was snaking down past Paradise Pier Hotel. And I would sit on the concrete bench in front of the closed gate at Disneyland, and I would write.
Wow.
And I wasn't the only one was willing to wait and do all that. A lot of similar people, we'd all look at the gates so solemnly, but we knew one day it would come back. And so glad that it did.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. Pete is wondering, Marcy, what is your favorite spot? It doesn't have to be a ride at Disneyland.
Actually, none of them are rides. I write a lot, that's my, if you follow me on Instagram, you'd see like today's office and different spots at Disneyland, but anybody can do this. So Walt's box at the Golden Horseshoe is, if you're looking at the stage, it's on the right or stage left. That was his personal box. He didn't use it very often because he was a man of the people. He would usually, be on the ground floor with everybody else, but there's a plug in there too. So if you want to recharge, you can have a root beer float and keep your computer charged. But I want to be really clear. If people are waiting for a seat because it's busy, I never take a seat. I would get up and go. I would go early in the day before it got popular. The other is at Hungry Bear Restaurant in Critter Country. If you go into the very, very back of the upper deck there, in that back corner, you have a view of Walt's train, Walt's Tom Sawyer Island, Walt's Mark Twain, and Walt's Columbia ship, which he also wanted to build. And it's just a spectacular view, and it's quiet, and it's got the shade over it. And those would probably be, off the top of my head, my two favorite spots.
Those are great. Thank you so much. We have another question. Roger is wondering, who were some of the people that you interviewed for the book that you found extra interesting or really had great information that surprised you?
Well, thank you for that question, Roger. When I sold Eat Like Walt to Disney, the first person I wanted to meet was a gentleman named Marty Sklar, who worked with Walt since 1955. Marty was an editor at UCLA for the newspaper, and he took a summer job to try to help Walt develop the Disneyland news. And he was just so struck by how much time Walt Disney, a week before Disneyland opened, was paying attention to this newspaper. And he concluded it is because Walt really believed, as I said earlier, that Main Street, USA really was a real small American town, and every small American town had a newspaper, and Walt's Disneyland would too. Marty's career went on from there. He never went back to UCLA. He stayed with Walt. He became an Imagineer. Then when he retired, he was an ambassador for all Imagineering and just beloved. And so when I met with him, which was remarkable, he said, I've got some people I'd like to introduce you to. So he sent me a memo, and if any of you know these names, and you'll can imagine how I reacted. He said, I'm thinking of setting up a lunch with Jim Cora, who's, I'll tell you, my mentor that I mentioned, Disney legend, Ron Dominguez, Disney legend, tell you about Ron in a minute, and also Jack Lindquist, who was the president of Disneyland at the time, or past president of Disneyland. And I was like, what do I think? Yes. So when I went to that lunch, Jim Cora, I had all of Marty's books with me because I wanted him to sign it. And the first thing Jim says to me is like, do you travel with those because you can't sleep? Marty's books. And I was like, okay, that's how Jim Cora operates. It's like ping pong. And Jim retired as president of Disneyland International. His book is just about to come out. Please go to Copperfields and buy it. Ooh. It's called Not Just a Walk in the Park, which is a coincidence, but about his Disney global career. And because after Jim started with Walt as a ride operator in 1957, and the storied career, he opened both parks in Japan, and he opened Paris Disneyland. But Ron Dominguez is famous, besides being somebody who helped run the park for years and years. His grandparents lived on the property where Pirates of the Caribbean is now. So he grew up there. That house is actually backstage at Disneyland, and then the palm tree, his grandparents had planted that when they got married around look in the book, I'm thinking around 1876 or something. And it was very important. They wanted to save that tree, and Walt agreed to save the tree. And it was expensive because the procedure to ball it and do all that. So that tree that was at the original house where Ron Dominguez, Disney legend, lived, is if you go to the Indiana Jones Fast Pass queue, that's where that tree is. So it's not the oldest thing in Disneyland. A lot of people think it's the carousel, which it's not. It's not Ron's tree. It's close. It is, of course, the petrified tree that Walt bought. And it's more of a joke that he said that he gave it to Lillian as a present, but it is installed at Disneyland, and that's the oldest thing that's at Disneyland. But Ron Dominguez's tree is number 2.
How cool. Super funny. Loretta said that the back corner of the Hungry Bear is her quiet place too, or their family's quiet place.
It's the best, isn't it?
Candy is wondering, do you know the launch date of the Mark Twain?
Yeah, that was an opening day attraction. Oh, by the way, Candy, my friend got me this phone. Let me see if Nikki's on. Hello.
Yeah, you have to tell us about that phone.
Well, this is a vintage 1972 Mickey Mouse phone, and it works. My friend Candy that just asked that question works at Whistle Stop.
Oh, wow.
In downtown Santa Rosa, which is another favorite haunt of mine and my kids. And that was my Christmas gift. She had seen it in the shop. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about it. But yeah, so the Mark Twain debuted as an opening day, July 17th, 1955. But it was not the first time that the Mark Twain went around the rivers of America. That occasion was for Walt and Lillian's birthday, anniversary, which was July 13th, their 30th anniversary. They called it Tempest Fugit, Time Flies. And all their guests got to take the inaugural run on the Mark Twain. They had mint juleps, the adult kind. Then they went to the Golden Horseshoe for a performance of show and cake cutting. And so July 13th, 1955 was the first time that it ran.
Gosh, I know we spoke about this before, but going to Disneyland with you must be such a treat. I mean, you know so much. You just be pointing everything out.
I'm exhausting, Jamie.
Yeah, you said you can outrun everyone, even the kids, right?
Yeah, nobody at the end, they all say, I want to go to Disneyland with you. I'm like, okay, you know what you're signing up for, right? Because you can tell I have a lot of energy even at 8 o'clock at night. But you know what's fun about it is this book is my way of giving everybody a tour through Walt Disney's eyes, the founder's eyes part. But obviously a lot of it comes from me too. It's just that my storyteller this time, in Eat Like Walt, I was a storyteller. This time, Walt is the storyteller. But I do think that there's a lot there. Some of the reviews, they're always nerve-wracking, but the one that I was the most nervous about was the Orange County Register, Brady McDonald, because Brady has been reviewing theme parks for 25 years. And Diane Peterson, thank you so much from the Press Democrat for that beautiful feature article, also helping to support Copperfields. And, I lost my train. What was I saying? I already lost my train of thought.
You were just talking about how this was your gift to us to help us see Walt's Disneyland through his eyes.
Oh, right. Thank you. And Brady McDonald. Thank you.
Yeah.
I got. And so, but anyway, she used one of the quotes from that article where he said, even the most hardened, paraphrasing, know-it-all Disneyland people are going to learn something. And that is the point. There is almost 15,000 words in endnotes alone. I hired a master of library information science to help me compile them. Like I said, hundreds of sources. It was very important to me to make sure that future historians will know where to find more information about what I put in the book. But we didn't need another book about facts for Disneyland. I've got a ton of them behind me. There's excellent ones. My book is about feelings. The feeling that we get when we go past the gate under the railroad tracks and we see Sleeping Beauty for the first time, that inside the berm, happiness and magic space that is Disneyland, and that Walt had intended, and how miraculous it is that what Walt Disney intended in 1955 is the gift that keeps on giving, and we still have it in 2022. So it's more about feelings than it is about facts, but it's laden with facts.
Thank you so much. It is just so great. I know myself included will really appreciate getting our hands on that and all of the images. Before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on, I see you have a new book coming out about Disneyland, and it's you and another author about Delicious Disney.
Well,
Can
that
you-
book came out actually, but it's not available yet. It's a little complicated.
Oh.
So it's I'm trying to get out of the food world, but it always stays with me. Not really. But I collaborated with Pam Brandon, who has written all of the Delicious Disney cookbooks. And I'm being a historian, I write stories and narratives. And we thought, let's do something together. And we came up with this plan to do a cookbook for Walt Disney World's 50th anniversary, which was October 1st of last year.
Oh, wow.
Pam has all the relationships with the chefs, and she's been doing this, for 30 years. I couldn't, it was just a fun partnership. So she worked on the recipes and the testing and, coordinating the chefs. I wrote the stories. That book will be available at Copperfields
Yes.
in April. I think it's April 5th. Right now, it's what we call a park exclusive. It stays in the parks only to make it special, and then it will go to wide release on April 5th. And then what I'm writing now is, a lot of people don't realize that National Geographic is owned by Disney. And so I did not know that I was going to accept this, but I was asked if I wanted to audition, I guess you would say, to write a book for National Geographic. And I said, no, I just had 2 babies. I want to enjoy them,
Oh my goodness.
because, writing books, and it's so very intense.
It is.
So it was just after Walt's Disneyland had gone to print, and like a month after Walt Disney World Delicious Disney had gone to print. And I was going to take a little time off, but I started thinking about it. Like my friend, who was a surrogate grandfather to me, used to say, take the cookies when they're past, which is a Depression era saying of, you never know when you'll get it again. So, okay, sure. And the next day I met with the editor, and she offered me the book.
Wow.
So I am writing National Geographic's 100 Best Disney Adventures.
Oh,
And that comes out in September of this year. And you can
Oh
buy it
my.
at Copperfields. So we'll do another one of these in September.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, hopefully we can have you in person next time, and we can get
for
everything signed, and it would just be so great to see you, present in person to us.
I would love that. I truly love Copperfields. And as I said in the beginning, it has been a tradition with my kids and I, for our family, every birthday, every Christmas, read books. It's so important to support your independent bookstores. And you will hear me if you hear my podcast, and you can go to my site, marcycarrikersmothers.com. I always say, where can you get it? So of course you can get it at Amazon and those type of online, but please support your independent book dealers. So please do. And there's one thing I have to add. Susie Hutzel, Cameron and Company in Petaluma.
Oh,
is
yes.
the brilliant woman who designed that book. So while I picked out every image and obviously wrote it, the look, the feel, the banners, the composition, the layout is all Susie Hutzel, a Sonoma County person right here. Thank you, Susie. And also shout out to my editor, Jen Eastwood, who lives in Petaluma. So we've got some Disney people.
Yes, yes. And yes, Sonoma County love. Thank you so much. Just hearing those stories about Copperfields and your kids, it's, a woman of my heart. It's so special to hear. And thank you so much for being with us, for sharing with us. I will include all of this information in tomorrow's email to all of you wondering. Yes, the recording. I will include links to pre-order, the discount code, tonight's title, everything you need, her website. So if you just watched tonight, it's okay. We've got you covered. And on that, Marcy, thank you so much for being with us. It was really—
You're welcome. And I'm just going to say, Amy, the question about, yes, I've been able to ride the Lily Bell. I hope you've been able to ride the Lily Bell, which is the special caboose that goes after Walt's train. And when they reopen the Grand Circle Tour at Disneyland, take that tour, and you're pretty much guaranteed to ride the Lily Bell if you haven't been in it yet.
Lily Bell.
And Lily Bell is named for Walt's wife, Lillian, and that is my parting comment. I just wanted to answer everybody if I could.
I love it. Thank you so much. And
Bye, guys. Have a magical day. I hope I see you at Disneyland.
Yes, have a great evening.